Well, good Wednesday morning. Welcome to the WLBB Community Voice here on News Talk 1330 FM 106.3, also streaming live online at newstalk1330.com. And this morning, we are on the News Talk 1330 WLBB Facebook page, encouraging your questions and comments throughout this morning's program with our guest, District 18 State Representative Tyler Paul Smith. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Colin. It's great to be with you again.
Glad to have you here. We were joking about you have a nice collection of the WLBB mugs now, but you finally have one. You've got one for each of your 5 offices locally. You can take that one to the state and make sure like the desk pictures that they have on your press release pictures. You can have that one sitting on the desk right in front of you.
Oh, that's for sure. And just to let you know, I always listen to WLBB every morning. Even though I was in Atlanta, I'd pull up the local news every morning that I was there, so I enjoyed getting to hear you even though it was from afar.
All right, let's clip that for the station liner for tomorrow. Tyler Paul Smith, our guest this morning, going to talk about election reform, the landfill legislation that could be voted on next year, and all the other good stuff that went on this year, everything we can cram into a half hour. Let me ask this first: the legalese and the way lawyers do write bills. I mean, because that's what it comes down to—the lawyers writing the bills. Do you think it's always easy for the average Joe to read those when they're going back to review? And I think about that because we're talking about this election bill, and there is some debate. I think in some of the debate, people do know what it says, but it's just political to challenge it. But in a lot of those bills, it is hard. You got to read over them 4 or 5 times to get the gist.
Oh, sure. I'll give you an example. I had a bill that we were toting day 39 that on Sunday afternoon I had a question that I called my legal analyst for the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee, and I was going over it, and he asked me a question about statutory interpretation of this bill, and we determined that we needed to put 2 commas within the bill, and this is after 5 or 10 lawyers had looked at it, and it had been vetted, and we were looking through it and thought, how would a judge interpret this? Is this language going to apply to everything before it? So 2 commas made a huge difference. We were able to recommit that to the Rules Committee and get those changes made. So it has its advantages with having lawyers involved in the process, because without those 2 commas, the intent of the legislation would not have been achieved.
Well, as far as local residents, the average Joe and Josephine reading that, I mean, is there a and it doesn't feel like anybody's going to trust anybody else to reinterpret it either, because you're going to hear one side from one media outlet and one from another. I mean, is there any suggestion as far as how they can better understand it?
I would say this. If you look, there are a lot of different talking points that legislators will put out about different pieces of legislation that they're carrying. That can help you with the intent. I will say this. If you get accustomed to reading legislation and you understand which code sections that this will affect, usually the best thing to do is to pull that code section. The good thing is usually you can find these code sections online for the most part, and looking at the code section and realizing which changes this legislation is going to make to that existing statute, that helps. Without the statutes in front of you, you do have a hard time understanding what the legislation is actually going to do.
Mm-hmm. Tyler Paul Smith, our guest on this morning's Community Voice program, newly elected. I mean, I guess your freshman season, your freshman year. I mean, is it officially over, or we count you as a freshman all throughout this year? Because you're actually going to be doing things, throughout this year.
Right. I want to say that the freshman year is over with, and now we're into the sophomore year, and hopefully not to go into the sophomore slump, as they say. But I had a very interesting experience. I have to give some credit to Jay Collins. We had a situation where I was going to tote a department bill for the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, and he was looking at a Second Amendment legislation piece, and we spoke with one another, and he said that this gun bill would be a very good thing for me to get involved with. Well, not very many freshmen are involved in Second Amendment legislation, so I was very, very lucky that Jay Collins suggested that I go and see Chairman Alan Powell and Chairman Rick Jaspers. So we ended up carrying a piece of gun legislation this year. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but we learned a lot, and I think in the off season we're going to have a lot of issues to discuss, especially some constitutional issues that I think we need to iron out. But I'm looking forward to coming right back. The bill's not dead. It's still alive. The session is actually a 2-year biennial, so even though it didn't pass, it's still alive for next year, and we're going to come back.
You said freshmen usually don't get the chance to participate in 2A related bills. Is that because they're so controversial and the guys with seniority want the attention, the association with them? Why wouldn't somebody in the first year be associated with those?
It's a little bit of both, Colin, and a lot of times it's the subject material. There are easy lifts, such as department bills, just minor changes, a code revision bill. But when you're dealing with Second Amendment legislation, that's what you would consider as a heavy lift. And so knowing the subject matter and being able to articulate that, it can be intimidating for a freshman. Luckily for me, I'd worked over there before. I knew a little bit about the process. However, even though you've worked over there, until you're in the legislative seat, you really don't understand how it really works. So it was a huge lift. I had plenty of people helping me along the way, and I'm thankful for that. And I think that we had a good piece of legislation, and we survived the Rules Committee. That was the huge hurdle, trying to get it to the floor. So I was really pleased in the progress that we did make.
Going to give trying to devote a lot of time to your landfill legislation, but I do want to go through the elections bill a little
Sure.
bit. And I want to throw some things out at you, and you can say, no, that's not right, or you can elaborate on them. And I'm going to just kind of pick here because I know we couldn't do it in a half hour. Voters will now have less time to request absentee ballots based on this law, which was signed by Governor Brian Kemp.
You still actually have a period of time before the 11 days preceding the election to actually request the absentee ballot. So I would say that you still have the same amount of time. And what we actually did with this bill, Colin, is we have increased the number of weekend voting days. That seemed to be something that was very popular in the state. And you go to a mandatory 17 days of early voting in our state. Those 17 days consist of 2 mandatory Saturdays that our elections offices in the state have to be open to allow people to come and vote. That was not the case. Saturday voting was optional in many counties. In some counties, like my own county of Haralson, we didn't have Saturday voting in the general election or the runoff election back in January. So I'm really pleased with the changes that we did make. And also, you could have up to 19 days of early voting. We gave the option of 2 Sunday voting days as well. I know there were some concerns about whether we should be voting on Sunday or not, but we gave that option to the local registrar boards, and I think that was a move in the right direction. So I would submit to everyone that it's easier to vote now in the state of Georgia than it ever has been, and we've done it in a way that brings integrity and transparency to the process.
Now, I know you're a man of faith.
Yes.
Would you vote on Sunday?
I wouldn't vote on Sunday. I usually vote on the day of. I had to vote absentee in college, and even though I know that my local election registrar, Mr. Vaughn Gable, he always took care of us in making sure that our ballot was counted. There was always this twinge of suspicion in me. What if the mail loses my ballot? So once I got out of college, I always make sure that I always vote the day of. I'm a little bit of a traditionalist in that aspect.
And I think that's attractive to a lot of people. They still feel like traditionalists. But if you would you not vote on a Sunday?
I wouldn't vote on a Sunday, but if somebody else wanted to vote on a Sunday, Sunday afternoon, I don't think that.
I guess looking at the religious aspect. If there's, they're saying it's open for Sunday, you can go after church, but a lot of people who would go to church just wouldn't vote on Sunday. They just don't feel.
Right, that's true. That's true. I think the way that I would vote on a Sunday is if the ox was in the ditch, as they say.
The strict new ID requirements for absentee ballots, and I'm kind of balanced on this one. The fact that it wasn't there before, I do look at it as like, well, yeah, you probably should have to have ID to prove who you are to vote, but it wasn't there before until now. What's the reaction to that?
Right. Well, you saw that we had a lot of issues with our signature verification, and there was a plethora of different discussions and issues that were brought to our attention. I know Wes Cantrell, representative in the State House that I'm lucky to serve with, he pointed out the issues with it by showing how his signature had changed from just about 5 years ago until now. So with the ID that we have now required that people have, if you don't have a government-issued ID, you can go to your local county voter registrar, and they will issue you a ID free of charge. This doesn't cost anyone a dime to get this ID to vote, and I think that if we're going to require people to show an ID to buy Sudafed, in the store, why not show an ID to vote? It's not that big of a deal. I think that this brings more transparency to the process. There was another bill that was introduced dealing with those citizens that are legal U.S. citizens here in the state, that Georgia driver's license would actually notate that on the license itself. And even though the voter registrar's office will verify these ID numbers with who's on the voter registry list, I think that that would be an even better attempt at making this more secure, although I'm very pleased with the ID requirement that we have put in the legislation that passed and was signed by Governor Kemp.
If you're here illegally but you have a driver's license, your social security number, you don't have a social security number though, right?
That should be the case. I have heard situations where that may have been going on, but I couldn't testify to that personally.
District 18 State Rep Tyler Paul Smith, our guest on this morning's Community Voice program. Do want to talk as much as we can about the election reform, and then, and of course, talk about his landfill legislation. I did kind of promote it on the show yesterday. I'm sure a lot of people want to see what you have to say about that. There's been a lot of talk about being able to offer food or water to people in lines while they're waiting outside, and I guess my understanding is there's a distance that you can be away and provide water, but maybe not allowing people who could be somehow influential. Maybe you're not allowed to wear clothing or they promote a certain issue on election day, so it's not like that's the case, but I guess just the potential influence of that person there handing you water.
Sure.
Is that what that's about?
Yes. So we had an issue over in Metro Atlanta of where a candidate was going within the 150-foot line handing out pizza. He had ordered pizza for voters, so that was an issue that we knew that we needed to address. And I know there's been a huge talk about whether we can provide water or not. What this bill will allow is for the county registrars to set up self-serve water dispensary, I guess you could say stands or kiosk, if you will, within that 150-foot area of the polling place. So you can still go and get water within the 150 foot. You just can't have anybody handing it out other than a self-serve station there for the voters. You can still, outside of that 150-foot area, you could hold a barbecue, you could hold a pig roast, oyster shucking, whatever you want to have, as long as it's not within that 150 foot, and that's as the law has been for many years here in the state of Georgia.
The legislature, I don't remember if they have the option or if this is already in effect, that they can that they basically oversee the state elections board if they don't want the SOS running that for whatever reason, if they have a question to pull him out.
Yes. So with Secretary of State Raffensperger, who is number one on all of our list to vote out in the next election, we really had an issue with some of the initiative that he took, so to speak. We had a lot of concerns of whether he had overstepped his constitutional authority. And so we had to rein that back in, and he would no longer be the head of the state elections board.
Is that in effect, or is that
that's in effect as of this legislation being signed into law by Governor Kemp. So I thought that was a great move, and for all those hollering about partisan people being in charge of elections, well, guess what? We just removed a partisan member of that elections board and replaced him with a nonpartisan head of the election board.
But do legislators not have oversight of that at all?
We still do have oversight, and this was a good exercise of legislative oversight as well. What we've seen, unfortunately, in the pandemic, and I think I even touched on this during the campaign, is executive decisions being made without the legislature being involved with it. That was a concern that we had, and I think as a legislature we made a move to take that authority back.
Well, what are the qualifications for this person who will oversee the state board?
So it would have to be someone that has been involved with our elections process. It wouldn't be just a novice. It's not going to be a political hack, so to speak. This would be someone that is actually qualified to deal with this, and I believe that we have plenty of qualified individuals in our state that could be put in this position. So I'm sure that whoever fills the position will do a great job going forward.
I guess the concern there is that you put somebody else in there, and it's like if somebody else would have been in that place of Raffensperger, they possibly could have quote found those 14,000, 11,000 votes. I mean, if they have that decision to make.
You know, I don't think that would have necessarily been the case. I think, from what I understand, the Secretary of State, he was a little in over his head. And I understand he may have thought at the time that he was doing something good, but constitutionally, I don't think he was very aware of what his decisions were going to have as far as a consequence 6 months down the road. So I think that the Secretary of State, we really need to look at finding somebody to replace him in the next election, and I'll be supporting someone else for the Secretary of State's job.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time here. Need to get to a break. But the GOP-led legislature is empowered to suspend county election officials.
Yes.
What's the concern with that? Why is that okay?
Well, I mean, look at the issues that we had in DeKalb County and Fulton County. If you've been a student of Georgia politics for any manner of time, you will see that it's always Fulton and DeKalb that we have the issues with. I mean, you hear these horror stories of how these elections are ran in DeKalb and Fulton, and so if someone is repeatedly messing up and actually making sure that people are able to vote in these counties, then the state now has authority to come in and take over and make sure that elections are run the way that they're supposed to be by law.
To say, if I try to defend that anyway, it's a double-edged sword, because I think if you're going to say, Republican can come in and take that over if they sense something is going on wrong, but you have to go look back, and you're suggesting there have been problems with these counties that are Democrat-led over the last several years. So I mean, it's
if you get into a partisan situation, if there was some kind of malicious intent on a partisan individual's part to go in and take over these elections, then you always have the courts as a remedy. And I think that is something that we need to be keen on, because I mean, the state could flip over to a Democrat governor. I mean, you never know. I hope not, and I'm going to do my best to make sure that it doesn't. But I think that you still have the courts as a way to remedy any kind of partisan shenanigans going on in that situation.
848, Tyler Paul Smith, District 18 State Rep, our guest on this morning's Community Voice program. I'm going to try and take a look and see if we have any questions or comments. I hope I can get those in during our final segment, but I do want to talk about your landfill legislation. And we'll do that after this break. Community Voice brought to you by Tanner Health System, Oak Mountain Academy.
Travel, get-togethers, Sunday morning worship. COVID-19 has almost put a stop to our way of life. Vaccination is our best shot at getting back to normal. The COVID-19 vaccine is based on more than a decade of research. Trials show it's safe and can provide up to 95% protection when you've received both doses. Tanner is committed to making the vaccine as widely available as possible, giving you a shot at getting back to life. Until then, keep wearing your mask, washing your hands, and avoid gatherings. Learn more and get updates at tanner.org/vaccine.
As a graduate of Oak Mountain Academy, I've found that my experience on the mountain prepared me beyond all expectations. As a junior at Auburn University, I approached my studies with great confidence thanks to what I learned at OMA. When I think back on my time on the mountain, I think of my teachers. Their genuine love and concern for me as a student was always evident, and now, as an adult, I still foster those relationships. I'm Carly Robinson, an Oak Mountain Academy alum. Visit oakmountain.us to see how you can offer your child an amazing opportunity to be a warrior.
848, welcome back to the WLBB Community Voice here on News Talk 1330 FM 106.3. Got 11 minutes left in the program. Still have to take one more break. We'll take that at the tail end there, Mr. Graddick, pressing the buttons, if that's okay. We'll talk about Tyler Paul's landfill legislation. Here's notes I took about that, I think about three weeks ago. District 18 State Rep Tyler Paul sponsoring legislation that, if approved by legislators and signed by the governor, would prevent a controversial landfill from being built in Haralson County. It's House Bill 557. That statement, can you elaborate on it? Was it the initial statement good? And
sure. Oh, yeah. I think you hit it on the head. The only thing I would say is this also applies to the whole state of Georgia. As I found when we initially tackled this issue over in the legislature, I had a lot of friends that I had made already that were legislators from other areas of the state, and this is an issue in rural Georgia throughout our great state. So I found many allies on both sides of the aisle concerning this issue. So with the help of now Commissioner Ryan Farmer out of Haralson County, we came up with a piece of legislation that would actually require someone wanting to put in a new landfill in an area to show a certificate of need for a landfill to be there, showing that there's not adequate capacity and existing landfills in the area to take the amount of garbage and waste that is being produced in that area. Kind of like you had to prove a certificate of need in health care as well. Also, we put in there that you could not have a landfill within 50 miles of another existing landfill. What you'll see is, and that was tailored to your more rural areas, because, I mean, if you don't have a lot of economic growth, or you don't have a lot of economic stimulus in these rural areas, then these people can dress it all up, make it look pretty, and say, here, we can provide you with a lot of revenue for your rural area. We can solve the needs that we saw be created for NAFTA coming in and wiping out a lot of our textile industries here in this state. So they dressed up, make it look pretty, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's still a dump. And we're going to have to deal with that for generations. I know I pointed out beforehand, we have two former landfills in Haralson County. And you want to know what's going on in those areas right now? Absolutely nothing. You can't build on it. So for a sustainable revenue system, I don't think a dump's the way we need to go. But as I said, this is legislation that will affect the whole state. I know that we have not been successful in getting it out of the House. We tried hard. We worked until the very last hour of the legislative session trying to find a way to make sure that we got some kind of language from our bill passed into law. We were unsuccessful in that, but it's not dead. We've still got another year to go. I also introduced legislation that would create a study committee on landfills. And although that was not ever brought out of committee, I will say this: I believe that this summer we are going to hold hearings in Meriwether County concerning landfills and really getting into what effect landfills are having in our state. So I'm looking forward to that. But this legislation that we introduced, it also took into consideration discharges, bodies of water. What's this going to have an effect as far as on our local water systems? I mean, you look at where they're wanting to put the Haralson County landfill in particular, the Tallapoosa River is not far from it. And so what's that going to do if there are discharges into this water system and the aquifers in the area from this new landfill that they want to put in? What's that going to do when it goes downstream to Alabama? State of Georgia could be facing a legal suit from Alabama for pollutants flowing on down the river into Alabama. So it's not only for Haralson County. I talked to a legislator from down in South Georgia, and he was concerned with landfills in his area as well. So he was a great insight and help to us as we tried to move forward. And so I will say this: it's generated a lot of interest, Republicans and Democrats alike.
The number sticking to me right now, 50-mile radius from a landfill. Where does that leave in the state of Georgia? I mean, nobody's really going to want to accept our trash. Where does that leave a place to build a landfill?
Right. So I had a lot of information given to me by some of the pro-waste management folks that said that you couldn't put a new landfill anywhere in the state of Georgia. And so we looked at that, and I asked them the question. I was like, well, how are we looking on capacity right now in our existing landfills? I mean, are we running out of room in the existing landfills? And no one had a really good answer at first, but I will say this: they said that we had about 9 or 10 years of capacity left in our existing landfills. So I hope that's something we get into in the hearings this summer, that I hope that Chairwoman Lynn Smith, who I'm honored to serve with and is the dean of our Carroll County delegation, I really look forward to kind of parsing through this and actually seeing the real live facts and data concerning that.
As far as certificate of need, you say 10 year, you believe 10 years, they were okay for 10 years, but a certificate of need, if that's approved next year, that might be able to get a certificate of need after 5 years if you're planning to do a landfill. So,
potentially.
Yeah.
I mean,
if you know it's going to run out after 10 years, I mean,
right,
there will be need.
Potentially so, yeah. But this is going to they're going to have to show proof that there's limited capacity in the state, because I hadn't heard it before, and this was something that's brought up at the very end of the discussion in the session.
Okay. Steve, let's go ahead and we'll take that final break right now. I'm going to ask 2 more questions about election. When we come back, I think we'll have like 2 more minutes left. Community Voice brought to you by Tanner Health System, Oak Mountain Academy, News Talk 1330 FM 106.3.
travel, get-togethers, Sunday morning worship. COVID-19 has almost put a stop to our way of life. Vaccination is our best shot at getting back to normal. The COVID-19 vaccine is based on more than a decade of research. Trials show it's safe and can provide up to 95% protection when you've received both doses. Tanner is committed to making the vaccine as widely available as possible, giving you a shot at getting back to life. Until then, keep wearing your mask, washing your hands, and avoid gatherings. Learn more and get updates at tanner.org/vaccine.
At Oak Mountain Academy, our daily schedule includes convocation, prayer, and the Pledge of Allegiance. By doing so, we build a family-like community where all students grow and flourish and personal faith is encouraged. Through community service and a historical approach to biblical study, our students are taught the value of the warrior way, honesty, respect, and responsibility. Oak Mountain Academy. We are a family creating legacies. To learn more, visit oakmountain.us.
All right, 8:56. Got about 3 minutes left here in the Community Voice program. I'm Colin Worthington. My guest this morning, District 18 State Rep Tyler Paul Smith. Brian Kemp signed that the elections bill into law. I want to say it was last Thursday or Friday. Over the weekend, there was discussion that MLB might pull the All-Star game out of Atlanta and the draft out, and they eventually did do that. There's been some outspoken big CEOs about that. They weren't happy about it. Didn't do anything. Didn't boycott it such as MLB did. Kemp spoken out against them. What are your feelings on that whole situation once it was signed?
Sure. Well, I feel the same way the governor does about it. I mean, to let corporations that want to engage in this liberal cancel culture movement is very unfortunate. I mean, you look at the economic impact that the MLB pulling the All-Star game out would have. I saw an estimate yesterday of it would have a $50 million impact on this state. So now you see people like Stacey Abrams trying to backtrack on this. And it's just real interesting to me that they want to try to play this boycott card. And I'll tell you one thing, that's going to do nothing but hurt Georgia jobs and Georgia citizens. However, as a state legislator, and I know many others in the legislature feel the same way I do, we're not going to capitulate and we're not going to just roll over to them, because once they want to come in and voice their opinion on a election bill that actually brings integrity to the voting system here in the state of Georgia, it does not suppress voter participation in our elections. For them to come in after the fact, they never raised these issues while we were going through the legislative process. Not a single one of them came and brought their concerns to the legislature or to the governor, to my knowledge. So for them to come in and say that they want to boycott or they want to pull out of this state after the fact, that is just indicative of where this culture is headed, and I'm not going to stand with them at all or try to take up for them.
We got about a minute 30 here, but I mean, it's kind of silly. But I've read where some legislators are removing the Coke machines out of their offices and things like that. I mean, that's kind of a boycott and cancel culture too, in a way. But should all legislators not accept money from these big CEOs who spoke out against it then?
Well, I can tell you one thing. I won't be accepting donations from
Delta,
these.
Coke, UPS. I mean, there's...
No, I actually voted to end the Delta tax credit the other night. Unfortunately, Lieutenant Governor, in his infinite wisdom, didn't bring that up over in the Senate. So I've gone on record that I'm tired of these corporations trying to come in and trying to bully the legislature into doing their will when we've been trying to help them out through economic hardships. And for them to come in and try to sabotage the good work that we're doing, I can tell you one thing, I'm not going to stand for it, and I'll vote to do away with those tax credits again next session.
We could have gone on another half hour. I mean, I cut plenty short this show, but I appreciate you joining us this morning, talking about a lot of important things. Tyler Paul Smith, District 18 State Representative, representing portions of Haralson and Carroll County. 20 seconds. Is District 18 going to look a lot different next year after redistricting?
I sure hope not. I've got the best district in the whole state of Georgia, and I hope it stays the same, but we'll see. It may change a little bit.
All right, Tyler Paul Smith, thank you again for coming out. Thank you for listening to this morning's Community Voice here on News Talk 1330, FM 106.3. Have a great Wednesday.